Welcome to today's Deep Dive. I'm your host, and I'm here with our resident expert to really get into a fascinating topic today.
Glad to be here. We have a lot of ground to cover.
We really do. So our mission today is to explore the Morrill Land-Grant Acts. And our specific focus, the thing we really want to pull apart for you, is how this massive, highly complex 19th century land distribution scheme totally rewired the United States.
Right. It fundamentally transformed the country into a global powerhouse of technical and engineering education.
Exactly. And we're pulling all of our insights today from a really comprehensive Wikipedia article that details the history, the mechanics, and the long-term effects of these acts.
It's a great source because it doesn't just look at the laws, but the actual ripple effects across society.
So, okay, let's unpack this. I want you, the listener, to imagine for a second that you are living in the United States in the 1850s.
A very turbulent time.
Oh, absolutely. But you're smart, you're ambitious, and you look around and see the world changing, right? Steam engines are totally upending transportation.
Factories are starting to mechanize everywhere.
Right. You hear the hum of the Industrial Revolution, and you think, I want to be part of that. I want to be an engineer. I want to build railroads and bridges.
So you go looking for a college to teach you.
Yes. You look for a college, and what happens next?
Well, what happens is you hit an absolute brick wall of classical tradition.
A brick wall.
Completely. You're basically told that unless you come from a really wealthy patrician family.
Like the absolute elite.
Exactly. And unless you have spent the last decade of your life mastering Latin, ancient Greek, and moral philosophy, you just do not belong in a university.
That is just wild to me.
It was a highly exclusive club. Higher education before the Civil War was not designed for the practical application of knowledge at all.
Right. It's just a closed loop.
It was designed to produce gentlemen, clergymen, lawyers, and classical scholars. That's it.
So let me get this straight. You want to learn how to, say, calculate the load-bearing capacity of an iron truss. And the admissions office says, great, first translate this passage of Cicero from the original Latin, and then we'll talk.
That is precisely what they said. The entrance requirements across the board demanded strict proficiency in dead languages.
Which is, it's completely mismatched to what the country actually needed.
It was. If you wanted to learn how to improve crop yields on your farm or design a better steam boiler, the traditional university system viewed you with almost total disdain.
Disdain. Really?
Oh, yeah. Practical labor, what they called the mechanic arts and agriculture, they were viewed as vulgar.
Wow.
They considered them trades to be learned by sweat and apprenticeship, not academic disciplines worthy of actual scientific study.
It's just an incredible blind spot. The whole economy is upgrading from farming to an industrial powerhouse, and the education system is running on like a 17th century operating system.
That's a great way to put it.
So if you did manage to find some form of engineering instruction in the U.S. at that time, where were you even going?
Well, if you wanted formal engineering education before the 1860s, you were overwhelmingly likely to end up at the United States Military Academy at West Point.
Okay, the military.
Right. And because it was a military institution, the focus was incredibly narrow. It was entirely state-directed.
So you aren't learning how to build a commercial textile mill?
No, not at all. You were trained almost exclusively in military engineering. So fortress construction, artillery ballistics, coastal defense.
You're learning how to build a star fort to repel a navy, not a transcontinental railroad.
Exactly. And the source material points out that the instructors at West Point were the ones writing almost all the engineering textbooks of that era.
Oh, so they had a total monopoly on the literature.
A virtual monopoly, yes.
Yeah.
Sylvanus Thayer, the superintendent there in the early 19th century, modeled their curriculum on the French École Polytechnique.
Okay.
So it was highly mathematical, highly rigorous, but geared 100% toward the needs of the Army Corps of Engineers.
So a civilian trying to build a better plow is completely locked out.
Completely locked out of the intellectual infrastructure of the country.
Okay, so to understand how the U.S. began churning out thousands of engineers, we first have to look at the political gridlock that almost stopped it from happening.
Because you don't just dismantle centuries of tradition overnight.
Right, it's like waiting 60 years for a software update.
Yeah.
So where does this idea actually start?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the desire for practical, publicly funded education actually goes all the way back to George Washington.
Wait, really? George Washington?
Yes. In his 1796 address to Congress, he explicitly called for a national university and mentioned the public support of agricultural education.
That's amazing. 1796, the country is basically brand new.
The ink on the Constitution was barely dry. but Washington understood that a nation of subsistence farmers needed to apply scientific principles to be self-sufficient.
Right. They needed to maximize the land. But let me guess, Congress did nothing.
Absolutely nothing. They just kicked the can down the road for decades.
Classic.
The idea kind of percolated in the Midwest, but it didn't get federal traction until the 1830s and 40s.
Right. And that's when a guy named Jonathan Baldwin Turner enters the chat.
What?
Let's talk about Turner because he's fascinating.
He is a crucial figure here. He was classically educated himself, went to Yale, but he moved out west to teach at Illinois College.
And out there, he sees the disconnect, right?
He saw firsthand that the Latin and Greek he was teaching was utterly useless to pioneers trying to cultivate the prairie.
Right. These farmers are dealing with insect plagues and terrible soil, and Turner is like, Homer's Odyssey isn't going to harvest this wheat.
Exactly. So Turner starts championing this vision of what he called industrial universities.
Well, he's the one who figures out the funding, right? Because the federal government didn't exactly have massive piles of cash back then.
No, they didn't. But what they did have in staggering abundance was land, public land.
The ultimate 19th century currency.
Exactly. So Turner proposes what became known as the Turner Plan. He argued the federal government should grant tracts of public land to every single state.
And the states would sell it.
Right. Sell the land and use the proceeds to create a permanent endowment to fund a university.
An incredibly elegant solution. You leverage the physical expansion to fund the intellectual expansion.
It was brilliantly simple. And he was persuasive. He actually got the Illinois legislature to adopt a resolution in 1853 pushing for a national bill.
But then they hit a wall in Washington.
A massive political wall. Antebellum politics completely stalled it.
Because it's the 1850s, right? Every debate in Congress is a proxy war over slavery and states' rights.
Every single debate. And Southern legislators formed a solid bloc against the Land-Grant College bill. They repeatedly shut it down.
I just have to ask why? If you're a Southern politician representing an agrarian economy, why oppose a bill that teaches your people how to farm better?
It seems totally counterintuitive. But their opposition wasn't about hating engineering or farming. It was about states' rights and federal power.
Okay, unpack that for me.
Well, the dominant political philosophy in the South was strict constructionism. They viewed any attempt by the federal government to dictate educational policy as a massive overreach.
A slippery slope, basically. Like, if Washington funds our colleges, what else will they try to control?
Exactly. Will they try to control our labor system? Will they abolish slavery? That was the fear.
So keeping the federal government weak was a matter of survival for the antebellum status quo.
Right. A federally funded system of industrial colleges threatened to empower the working classes in a way the Southern planter aristocracy found deeply threatening.
Because their economy ran on enslaved labor, not an educated middle class. So the idea is just dead on arrival.
Pretty much. But there were also mechanical disagreements. Turner wanted equal grants for each state, regardless of size.
Which makes sense. One state, one college, one grant.
But Senator Lyman Trumbull of Illinois realized the heavily populated eastern states would never go for that.
Right, they'd feel shortchanged.
So Trumbull knew they needed an eastern congressman to reshape the bill. Enter Justin Smith Morrill.
Yes. Justin Smith Morrill. The guy with the perfect background for this.
He was a representative from Vermont. And unlike the patrician politicians, he was the son of a blacksmith.
He had to leave school at 15. Right.
Yes, to work as a merchant's clerk. He was self-educated and deeply resented that the traditional college system was closed off to people like him.
He is literally the living embodiment of the problem. He's the smart kid who wanted to learn, but couldn't afford Latin tutors.
So he gets to Congress and makes it his life's mission to tear that system down. He takes Turner's framework, but changes the math.
Right. Instead of equal grants, Morrill's 1857 bill tied the land to congressional representation.
Exactly. 20,000 acres for every senator and representative a state had.
Let's pause on that leverage. Every state gets 2 senators,
Yeah.
but representatives are based on population.
Right, so Morrill is massively shifting the financial benefit toward the heavily populated eastern and midwestern states.
A brilliant political maneuver. New York gets exponentially more land than a huge but empty western state.
It secured the northern and eastern votes. But while Washington is gridlocked, some states just decided to do it themselves.
Oh, right. They didn't even wait for the federal government. Michigan is the big one here.
Michigan is crucial. Their 1850 Constitution called for an agricultural school, and in 1855, they founded one.
Which is now Michigan State University.
Right. It opened in 1857, proving you could design a curriculum around scientific agriculture and that people actually wanted it.
It was the proof of concept Morrill needed. So he pushes his bill through in 1857. It survives 2 years of brutal debate, passes Congress in 1859, and
then President James Buchanan vetoes it.
it dies on the president's desk. Unbelievable.
Buchanan was a Northern Democrat, but a doughface highly sympathetic to Southern interests. He was desperately trying to appease the South and prevent a civil war.
And since the South hated this bill, Buchanan killed it to keep the peace.
He cited the financial cost, but leaned heavily on the constitutional argument, claiming Congress had no right to fund state-level education.
So it's completely blocked at the finish line. It really seemed like the movement was dead.
It did. If history hadn't taken a very dark turn, we might never have had the land-grant system.
Right. It took a literal national crisis to break the gridlock. Let's move the timeline to 1860 and 61.
Abraham Lincoln is elected. The Southern states secede. The Civil War begins.
And suddenly, the math in Washington changes entirely.
Secession meant the Southern congressional delegations abandoned their seats. The very people blocking the bill simply walked out of the room.
They just forfeit their veto power.
Exactly. The Republican Party suddenly had functional control of Congress, so Morrill sees his window.
He dusts off the bill. But he doesn't just submit the same exact text, does he?
No, he makes a brilliant addition. In 1861, he rewrites the bill to require these colleges to teach military tactics alongside engineering and agriculture.
This is a masterclass in reading the room. He disguises an education bill as a national security bill.
It was a profound pivot. Think about early 1862. The Union is struggling. The Army is expanding massively, and they desperately need trained officers and engineers.
Guys who can build pontoon bridges under fire, right? West Point couldn't supply enough people.
Not even close. So, by adding military tactics, Morrill made his bill an immediate strategic asset for the survival of the Union.
And it works flawlessly. It sails through Congress.
He also upped the land allocation to 30,000 acres per representative, and on July 2, 1862, Lincoln signs it.
Right in the middle of some of the darkest days of the Civil War, the Peninsula Campaign is failing, and Lincoln is signing a bill for colleges that won't open for years.
It really speaks to his profound belief in a future that wasn't at all guaranteed.
Okay, so it's law. But how did the mechanics actually work? Because the federal treasury is being drained by the war. Where does the public land come from?
The mechanics are vital here. The states got 30,000 acres per representative, but they couldn't just keep the land and build on it.
Right, they had to sell it.
Yes, and they couldn't use the sale proceeds for buildings or current expenses. The principal had to go into safe government bonds to create a perpetual endowment.
An enforced trust fund.
Exactly.
Right.
Only the interest generated by the endowment could be used to support the college.
So they're forcing the states to think long-term. And what was the exact mandate? What did they have to teach?
The language was highly specific. The leading object had to be, without excluding classical studies, to teach agriculture and the mechanic arts.
The mechanic arts. What exactly did that mean in 1862?
It was the catch-all term for applied sciences, engineering, manufacturing, metallurgy, thermodynamics, hydraulics.
The physics of the real world.
Right. And the goal, and this is a quote from the Act, was to promote the liberal and practical education of the industrial classes.
The industrial classes. That specific phrase just destroys the elitist university system.
It's the death knell of it. They are explicitly directing massive federal resources to working people, the sons and daughters of farmers and factory workers.
The people actually building the 20th century. Though the law did have a caveat about the rebellion, right?
Yes, Provision 6 stated that no state in rebellion was entitled to the benefit, so the South was locked out initially.
But it was designed for reunification. Once Reconstruction happened, they got their grants.
They did. And the rollout across the North and West was incredibly fast. Iowa was the first to accept the terms in September 1862.
Just 2 months after Lincoln signed it. And Kansas State was the first new land-grant institution created in 1863.
Right. And what's fascinating is the flexibility of the act. The federal government didn't hand down a strict template.
So if a state had a university, they didn't have to build a new one.
Exactly. States like Wisconsin and Georgia just bolted the practical sciences onto their existing classical flagships.
But other states built entirely new ones, like Purdue or Mississippi State.
Or they expanded smaller agricultural schools like Michigan State. And out west, some states didn't have a college at all.
So they used the funds to build their very first major university from scratch, like the University of Nevada.
It even extended to territories. The University of Alaska Fairbanks was founded in 1917, entirely funded by the 1862 legislation, long before statehood.
It's incredibly resilient legislative architecture.
Ah.
But we have to talk about the dark side of this ledger, the cost of the script.
Yes, this is where the story gets deeply complicated. And we need to report the source material's facts impartially here.
Right, we're just conveying what the historical analysis shows. So let's start with the mechanical side of the script. What if a state like New York didn't have enough federal land within its borders?
Right. New York was entitled to nearly 1 million acres based on their massive population, but they were fully settled, so the government issued them land scrip.
A voucher, a piece of paper.
Exactly. It authorized the state to select unclaimed federal lands in other states or territories, mostly out west.
But New York doesn't suddenly own a sovereign chunk of the West.
No, the scrip just gave the holder the right to take legal title to a parcel. Most eastern states didn't want to be absentee landlords, so they sold the scrip on the open market at a massive discount to speculators.
Right. Speculators buy it for pennies, claim the best Western land, and flip it.
That was standard practice. But the source material highlights one spectacular exception: New York, and specifically Ezra Cornell.
The founder of Cornell University. He was already rich from the telegraph industry, right?
Yes. When New York was going to sell its scrip cheaply, Cornell stepped in. He offered to take the scrip himself, act as a fiduciary, and hold the land until it was valuable.
So he locates the land, pays taxes out of his own pocket, and waits.
And his strategy was brilliant. He directed his agents to claim hundreds of thousands of acres of highly valuable white pine timberlands in Wisconsin.
Targeting a specific commodity. He knew the demand for timber to build cities was going to explode.
Exactly. Cornell University sat on those timberlands for decades. When they finally sold them to lumber barons, the profits were astronomical.
The records show New York generated roughly 1/3 of the total grant revenues for all states combined, despite only receiving 1/10 of the total scrip.
Masterful endowment management. But, and this is the crucial part, we must confront the foundational reality of the asset itself.
Right. We're talking about an overall allocation of 17.4 million acres. That's the size of West Virginia. Where did that land come from?
The historical data reveals a deeply troubling narrative. The U.S. government acquired this land via an extensive process of expropriation from indigenous peoples.
And the numbers are staggering. We are reporting directly from the source here. 17.4 million acres amassed through 162 violence-backed cessions and lopsided treaties.
Expropriated from 245 distinct tribal nations throughout the 19th century.
It wasn't just empty space waiting to be claimed.
No. The mechanism of the Morrill Act relied entirely on the ongoing campaign of territorial expansion and the displacement of native populations.
So the government takes the land, surveys it, and monetizes it.
Exactly. 10.7 million acres of indigenous land were meticulously divided into roughly 80,000 individual parcels. Those parcels became the scrip.
So I really want the listener to sit with this duality. The act that democratized education for the working class was simultaneously funded by the violence-backed displacement of indigenous populations.
It requires holding two competing historical truths at once. What's fascinating here is how the financial mechanics worked, but history is rarely a simple narrative of progress.
It's a profound duality. The colleges that train the engineers of tomorrow were seeded by these expropriated parcels.
It's a reality woven into the foundations of American higher education.
Absolutely. So, with the endowments secured, the universities opened their doors. And what happened next completely revolutionized the American workforce.
This is where the core focus of our deep dive really shines: the staggering statistics of the mechanic arts mandate.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Let's look at the data. In 1866, 4 years after the act, there are roughly 300 men with engineering degrees in the U.S.
And only 6 reputable colleges granting them.
300 engineers in a nation over 30 million. But then the land-grant colleges start spinning up. What happens in 1870?
Just 4 years later, there are suddenly 21 colleges offering rigorous engineering degrees. The number of graduates tripled to 866.
And it compounds. By 1880, they added another 2,249 engineers.
The acceleration is immediate. The dam broke.
And by 1911, the U.S. is graduating 3,000 engineers a year, with a total of 38,000 in the workforce.
And to put that in perspective, Germany, the preeminent industrial powerhouse at the time, was graduating 1,800 a year.
We were nearly doubling the output of the German Empire. The U.S. became the leader in technical education just 50 years after the act.
It's an educational miracle.
But there's a great irony here. Congress debated the bill mostly focusing on agriculture, right?
Yes, they were talking about plows and crop rotation.
But it was the mechanic arts engineering that exploded globally. Why did engineering scale so aggressively?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it's about timing. The act coincided precisely with the Industrial Revolution.
The country was physically changing faster than ever.
Right. They didn't just need farmers. They desperately needed hard infrastructure. Railroads, bridges, factories.
You can't build a Carnegie steel mill with a guy whose only training is building a brick fort.
You need people who understand shear stress and thermodynamics. The land-grant colleges provided the exact intellectual workforce required to build modern America.
The timing was perfect. The industrial economy was starving for technical talent, and this built the pipeline.
Exactly. But there was a major hurdle. Building this workforce wasn't just about teaching existing knowledge.
Because in the 1870s and 80s, the applied science often didn't even exist yet.
Right. You hire a professor of agriculture, put him in front of farm boys, and he has nothing useful to tell them.
He's just shrugging. Like, well, my wheat died too.
The system forced them to teach, but hadn't provided a mechanism for them to learn or discover.
Which brings us to how the system evolved to institutionalize knowledge. The Hatch Act of 1887.
Pushed by an Iowa State professor named Seaman A. Knapp and Representative William H. Hatch.
Knapp realized science requires dedicated funding. So he proposes agricultural experiment stations attached to every land-grant college.
And funded by a direct annual appropriation from the National Treasury, not a land scrip.
Hard federal cash. The Hatch Act gave each college $15,000 annually.
Which was a massive injection of capital in 1887.
So what did these stations actually do?
They applied the scientific method to the physical world. Soil chemistry, hybrid crops, veterinary medicine. They institutionalized discovery.
If a blight hits Iowa corn, the Iowa Experiment Station has the funding to find a cure.
Exactly. But discovering techniques in a lab isn't helpful if the farmers don't know about them.
Right, handing a dense scientific paper to a 19th century farmer is useless, which leads to the Smith-Laver Act of 1914.
This established federal funding for cooperative extension services.
Extension agents, an army of educators deployed across the country.
Right. Trained professionals traveling farm to farm, demonstrating techniques directly to farmers and homemakers.
Showing them how to terrace a field or safely can vegetables. It creates this beautiful feedback loop.
The university researches, the agent translates it to the farmer, and the farmer reports new problems back to the agent.
A triumph of policy. But while this ecosystem is expanding, we have to look at the deeply troubled social reality of the U.S. at the time.
Yes. The system didn't exist in a vacuum. This brings us to the Second Morrill Act of 1890, and we need to tackle this impartially based on the text.
Right. By 1890, Reconstruction had failed, and Southern states had instituted white supremacy as law.
Black students were legally barred from attending public institutions in the South, including the land-grant colleges their taxes helped fund.
So Justin Smith Morrill drafts a second act aimed at the former Confederate states.
It granted cash, not land, but required states to demonstrate that race was not an admissions criterion.
But they knew the South wasn't going to integrate.
They knew it was politically impossible then, so the law provided a loophole. States could fund a separate institution for African-American students.
And every Southern state chose segregation. So we have this deep paradox based on the source.
The 1890 Act legally facilitated segregated education.
But simultaneously, it provided the legal standing and funding that evolved into today's historically black colleges and universities.
The HBCUs, institutions like the Tuskegee Institute, which the source mentions, or North Carolina A&T.
It birthed an entire parallel system of black intellectual development. And this framework of expansion didn't stop there.
No, it continued. In 1994, Congress passed the Equity in Educational Land-Grant Status Act,
adding 35 tribal colleges and universities to the system.
funded via congressional apportionments, not land.
It's amazing. This 1862 idea just keeps expanding its architecture. Experiment stations, extension agents, HBCUs, tribal colleges.
It became the template for the future, which brings us to the modern blueprint.
From soil to the stars. The grant model is so successful, Congress just replicated it for new frontiers.
Once you prove tying funding to localized research works, you apply it to emerging challenges.
It's exactly like open source software. The 1862 Act is the foundational code, and they just fork it for new eras.
That's a great analogy. Look at the timeline. In 1966, Sea Grant colleges for aquatic research.
In 1985, urban grant colleges for urban research,
In 1988, space grant colleges for space research.
using a Civil War-era philosophy to fund orbital mechanics. I love that.
And in 2003, sun grant colleges for sustainable energy research.
And the modern scale is massive. The FY 2006 USDA budget allocated $1.033 billion to research and extension alone.
This raises an important question. How does a government effectively invest in its citizens' future?
Right.
The source shows that tying funding directly to the tangible needs of the era yields immense national dividends.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? Let's zoom back out to where we started.
1866. Only 300 engineering grads, mostly building forts.
And we watched that explode into thousands of engineers who built the 20th century.
The U.S. became the globally dominant force in technical education.
Exactly. So every piece of infrastructure you rely on, the roads you drive on, the device you are using to stream this audio, owes a massive debt to this shift from dead languages to applied sciences.
We've seen land, sea, urban, space, and sun grants follow this blueprint.
Which leaves us with a final, provocative thought. As we face the challenges of the 21st century, artificial intelligence, quantum computing,
Will we see a new Silicon Grant or Cyber Grant Act to democratize the next wave of technical education?
or has the era of publicly funded decentralized intellectual infrastructure passed? That's something for you to mull over. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.